Throughout the years of Julian's imprisonment and persecution, an incredible movement has been formed. A movement of people from all walks of life, from around the world, who support not just Julian, and not just us and our family, but what Julian stands for, truth and justice.
That is Stella Assange, the wife of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who's one of millions celebrating the news that the 53-year-old Australian has accepted a plea deal with the US Justice Department, allowing him to be released from prison. But who exactly is Julian Assange? What has he been accused of, and what does the deal mean?
The cost to Julian, of course, has been to be deprived of freedom for all these years. In the battle for journalistic freedom to publish, foundation of democracy.
The idea that he would be coming home to see his wife and his two young kids, along with his family, friends and supporters, obviously is unbelievably welcome.
The case had become such a sticking point for the alliance and had really become an almost untenable situation for the United States.
We're looking forward to seeing him in Australia. I think all sides of politics agree.
Well, Julian Assange is an Australian journalist born in Townsville who founded WikiLeaks in 2006, a site which leaked some of America's biggest secrets. In April 2010, it published footage of a 2007 US airstrike in Baghdad that killed almost a dozen civilians, including 2 Reuters news staff. In July 2010, WikiLeaks released over 90,000 documents which contained secret military reports about the Afghanistan war and classified files on the war in Iraq. Later that year, the site published thousands of US diplomatic cables, including candid views of foreign leaders and assessments of security threats. In November 2010, a Swedish court ordered Assange's arrest over rape allegations. Julian Assange denied the accusations and claimed he was set up, suggesting they were part of a US conspiracy to destroy WikiLeaks. His lawyer called the alleged victims honeypots. In 2012, Julian Assange took refuge in Ecuador's embassy in London, where he was later granted political asylum. Julian Assange made headlines in 2016 after his website published 20,000 emails from Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, believed to have been hacked by Russian operatives. In 2019, Swedish prosecutors dropped their rape investigation, but it was that year that the US Justice Department formally asked Britain to extradite Julian Assange to the United States to face charges that he conspired to hack US government computers and violated an espionage law. Prosecutors say he conspired with US Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to hack into a Pentagon computer and release secret diplomatic cables and military files on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. After spending 7 years living at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, he eventually lost asylum and was locked up in a maximum security prison where he would go on to spend almost 2,000 days. In 2021, a British judge found it would be oppressive to extradite him to the US because of his frail mental health. In April of this year, US President Joe Biden said he was considering a request from Australia to drop the prosecution against Assange. Fast forward to today, Julian Assange has boarded a plane out of the UK. He's set to plead guilty to a felony charge of conspiring to obtain and distribute classified information. He is due to be sentenced to 62 months jail, time already served, at a hearing tomorrow. The plea deal will allow him to return home to Australia and offers a solution to what was becoming an increasing political headache for the US government. This is some of the reaction being posted on social media. Tucker Carlson wrote, "A good man finally free. The tide is turning." RFK Jr wrote, "Julian Assange struck a plea deal and will go home free. I'm overjoyed. He's a generational hero." Another person posted, "Now that Julian Assange will be freed after striking a plea deal, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton have a lot to worry about." Assange is free. Remember, he was jailed for doing journalism and exposing the war crimes of the war machine. Here is some of the reaction to the news today.
Annalise, finally the diplomatic efforts have seen a return with Assange on his way home.
Look, it is a remarkable result after years of advocacy from the Australians on this. There was this bipartisan push. We had the bipartisan delegation come to Capitol Hill, and that inspired a group of lawmakers from the far right and the far left of their parties to put this letter together and put that pressure on the Biden administration. But it is interesting to note how they've come to this point. They did require Julian Assange to plead guilty to a felony offence. He'll have that time served, approved, likely by this federal court judge in the Mariana Islands. From looking into this, there is only one judge in this jurisdiction, so they should have a pretty good idea of what they can do. But there's every reason that people are still being circumspect about this, because the power at the end of the day is with the judge. And so until she's signed off on that, it is not finalised. But you wouldn't think that they would go through with this plan unless they were confident that this is going to play out as a pretty normal hearing, much to the point of the plea deal. But don't forget, we had the Biden administration also pretty sure that Hunter Biden's plea deal was going to hold up, and that blew up in their face. And so there is that pressure. At the same time, they would also know if something did go wrong there, this could be a huge diplomatic incident for a very important ally for the United States. Nonetheless, it does seem that this was a requirement of Julian Assange. I'm told that it had to be in this jurisdiction, the Mariana Islands, which I don't think anyone would have heard of before today. And that was because he didn't want to step foot on US soil. There's always the risk that you can be given a plea deal to be safe in one jurisdiction and another one swoops in with another charge. And all of a sudden you're on US soil, you're in a US prison, and you're in the system. So this is what they were worried about, having that plea deal signed off, walking out, not getting on the plane back to Australia, but ending up in another jail cell. So it seems like this is the deal that they came to so that they could have this agreement for Julian Assange to come back to Australia. Joe Biden gets to save face. He's pled guilty to something. There's been an acknowledgement that there's time served. The other pressure point on this was the fact that Chelsea Manning, who actually took the information in the first place, has already had the presidential pardon by Barack Obama after 7 years in prison. The caveat that kept being put forward in Chelsea Manning's case was that as a trans woman in jail, she was having a hard time and they weren't confident about keeping her safe. That's become an increasing pressure point as Julian Assange's case dragged out. And also the political factors here have changed. Libertarian votes will matter this election. Joe Biden wants them. Donald Trump wants them. RFK Jr is talking to them. He's been pushing Julian Assange's case. And it was notable when Donald Trump was asked about this a few weeks ago. He could have pardoned Julian Assange years ago and didn't. He wanted to keep putting the pressure on. He wanted to see what he could get out of him, considering he leaked a lot of stuff about the Democrats. But a few weeks ago, he said he was considering releasing Julian Assange. If he'd announced he was going to do it, it means Joe Biden has to follow him. He doesn't get the foreign policy win, so there was obviously that pressure to just get it done now so that they could claim the win, have him guilty, have him back in Australia so that the alliance is under less pressure.
Indeed, and it comes, Annalise, just days out from the first presidential debate. You'll be, of course, across that, and we'll be on air on Friday covering that at length. The economy is obviously the number one issue like it is here, but these foreign policy questions, would you expect any of that to feature during that first much anticipated debate on Friday?
Oh, absolutely. I get that foreign policy doesn't normally decide elections, but a lot of issues that voters have, they wouldn't call it foreign policy in their mind, but they certainly have foreign policy implications. When you're talking about things like Donald Trump pushing a global tariff, that's what's supposed to drive down prices for people. They like that idea. When we're talking about Julian Assange's case, it goes to freedom of the press. It goes to the idea that his supporters that he's been a political prisoner. And it goes to the fact that Donald Trump has a lot of ammo in this debate to say that foreign policy has been mishandled under the Biden administration. It is a fact there weren't any foreign wars during Donald Trump's tenure as president. There was, of course, a presence in Afghanistan, but look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's going to be a huge play for him in this debate. And so if he were to drop that, hey, I'm going to pardon Julian Assange, all of a sudden it becomes an issue that they can't handle anymore. So I think when we're watching the CNN presidential debate, we're not actually this time really going to be looking at policy. We're going to be looking at who's fit to fight. And I think that's going to be the thing, because everyone knows these two guys. No one's really changed their opinion on them. term, but we're looking at whether Joe Biden's up for another 4 years.
Yeah, indeed. It's a good point. Look forward to covering that with you on Friday. Annalise, thanks. Let's bring in Andrew Clennell. Andrew, you broke the news earlier. Some really interesting information that you had. Stephen Smith on board the plane with
Australia's High Commissioner to the UK, Stephen Smith, is accompanying Julian Assange to that court date on that plane on the way to Bangkok right now. And his imminent release comes after representations from the Prime Minister since NATO in Madrid in July 2022 to Joe Biden on multiple occasions, to Rishi Sunak, British Prime Minister, to Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor to the President, to Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and to Kamala Harris, the Vice President, and Kevin Rudd and Stephen Smith, the two ambassadors, have also been involved. So a full court press, if you like, another released prisoner for the government. They're not going to say too much publicly until it's through tomorrow morning, our time. But the expectation is it will go through. And Kieran, the US government administration was at pains to say you have to go through the Department of Justice on this. It is a plea deal. There's a separation of powers. They're concerned about the prospect of a Trump presidency and a precedent being set in terms of the separation of powers. And so all those boxes have to be ticked. And perhaps that's a reason why it's taken 2 years to come to fruition. But there's been pressure, as we pointed out in our coverage, from Australian parliamentarians, from advocacy groups, from all manner of stars. But I think ultimately this is a victory for Anthony Albanese, because the mere fact that he raised it on so many occasions, I've been told by government sources, indicates what store the Australian government placed on Assange's release and why he looks to be being released tomorrow.
Yeah, it is another big win on the diplomatic front for the government and a big win for Anthony Albanese, no doubt about it, Andrew, as you said quite rightly. And